welcome. You're listening to another new episode of NMPC Plus. My name is Josh. I'm one of the pastors here at New Mercy Palisades Church, and I'm joined today by Pastor Kathy. Hello, Pastor Kathy.
Hi.
And I am joined by Pastor Key. Hello, Pastor Key.
Hello.
Pastor Sam right now is off on vacation, jet setting around the world to Korea. And so we're thinking about him.
He's on vacation.
What?
Didn't he just start the job?
What kind of a vacation package did he get? How did he negotiate for this? I don't know, but that was a sweetheart of a deal. In any case, Pastor Sam, if you're listening, hopefully you're not because you should be on vacation. But if you're listening, we're thinking about you. Hope you're having a good time in Korea, in the motherland, as they say. And we're here holding down the fort. How you guys doing today?
Good.
I'm tired too.
Yeah. It's the rare occasion where all of us are kind of in a similar place right now, and that's just trying to keep it together. You know, just what does it look like when you're really fried? Like, what does a really fried Kathy, or what does a really fried Key look like?
I forget everything. I forgot to put on my ring. I forgot to bring the keys. Forgot everything.
I'm the same way. Pastor Key, what about you?
Yeah, my brain functions like 10%, and I can't even I can't engage anybody. I just want to sit on the couch. That's what I feel like right now. I felt like this from the morning, I would say. I woke up and I was like, maybe I'll take the day off. And then I realized I cannot take the day off.
No days off. No days off here.
If I take the day off, the next 5 days will be hell on earth.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, it's the nature of the business that we're in, and also, you know, the month that we're in. Community Month being the overarching theme of October, as well as all these different events and things that we have going on. I mean, this past Sunday we had our game night, which was really awesome, and we, it's just the case with our church that people that all of the people that showed up, not all of them, signed up on paper.
yeah, always.
So that might just be a consequence of our non-committal church. It's okay. We still love you. But regardless, it was a really great time, fantastic time. There were some people there that I wasn't expecting there who had a fantastic time. And then there were other kind of stalwarts in our church that just made it a really awesome time. Did you guys get to partake in any of the games at all?
Yes.
Yeah?
No.
I played one game. After I was done taking pictures, I played Telestrations.
It
got weird.
Really?
Yeah. It's
In what way?
It's like a telephone Pictionary kind of game. And, you start off drawing a picture, and then the next person has to guess, and then so on. And then by the end, you're like, oh, no, it's not my book. It's the next person's. And they're like, no, it's your book. And you're like, no, that's not the picture that I drew. That's not it. So it gets really weird. It gets really random. Yeah. You could see how people think.
Yeah. I didn't get
don't think.
Yeah, I didn't get to play any games either. So Pastor Kathy was literally the one person in our pastoral staff that got to enjoy the game night.
It was awesome. The
Yeah.
cookies were fantastic.
There
Shout
were
out to
cookies
Rala. Yes, they were fresh baked
Dang it.
from scratch.
I'm not sure that I had any. In any case, so we have plenty of things going on in our church right now. And if you're not in tune with any of that, if you're listening, if you're watching, you should probably go to our bulletin, or you should probably go to our link tree, or you should probably go to our Instagram, where you're going to get wind of all of these different events that are coming up. I mean, the next thing that we have coming up is there's like a women's hiking event as well as like the brunch club is trying to meet. So, I mean, that's reason enough for you to try to get on board with what's happening. But in any case, we move on. We have a bit of a shortened schedule today, kind of our time together. So I just figured we could get right into it, right, Pastor Key? You gave the message, and you're in the middle of your sermon series called Spirit Charged.
Yep.
And I got to say, I was really encouraged by it. I know more than a few people were encouraged by it. I got to speak to one member of our church who was just raving about the sermon. I mean, the preacher was good, of course we say that, but the content itself, just wondering like kind of where it came from, like what you were sort of doing with it. You know, those age-old questions, especially around this table of like, did you do what you wanted to do with the message? You know, is there anything that you're leaving on the table? So if you could just give us a bit of a rundown, bit of a summary, and then we'll sort of take it from there.
Yeah. So in the series, we're looking at what a spirit-charged community looks like, right? What does an activated and engaged community look like? First sermon, we looked at prayer. That's a big piece of a activated community, engaged community in the book of Acts. And then this week, we looked at the idea of fellowship. And I started talking about how human beings need community, right? Very basic facts. And then I grounded it in theology, the book of Genesis, how we reflect the Trinitarian relational design of God. And so our need for a relationship is actually a strength. People take it as a weakness, but it's actually part of our design. Then I moved into, while that's good, if we have human relationships, but we don't have a robust relationship with God, that's not a good state of affairs either, right? So God made us in such a way that we have Him, but if we don't have human relationships, that's not great. But if we have human relationships, but we don't have as a deep relationship with God, that's a problem. You see that primarily playing out in the life of Adam and Eve. Once there's that disruption in their relationship with God, you see disruptions coming up in their horizontal relationships and human relationships. And that plays out in our lives today. And then where did I take it after that? I think I took it to a place where, so you need God, but also one of the things that we do when what did I say? Do you guys remember where I went after that? Because
that I really liked a lot.
There was a very important connecting point I said there. Give me 1 second. Yeah, so I can't read it here. I think I said something like, you know, so we definitely need God. We can't just have human relationships because human relationships can't scratch that existential itch that we can only get from God, right? And then I spent a lot of time on that part, I would say, and how we try to fill that void with human relationships and various things. The only one who can do it is God. And so I think I gave a couple stories of that experience. And then I talked about, at the end, I tied it all together. I said, it's in Christian fellowship where you have both God and human relationships interacting and reinforcing one another, and that you experience the fullness of the beauty of God and the fullness of the beauty of human relationships. And you can only get that in the church. It's a very, very important truth. And then I tried to use that to plug the family groups and spiritual direction groups. And we got so many signups after that.
Yes.
But yeah, I kind of butchered what I talked about, but hopefully you guys listened to the message and it was a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, you have an opportunity to listen to it if you just go to the very, like the podcast that precedes this one, or if you go to our YouTube page, I mean, you'll have the live stream, and you watched full service. But one thing that I kind of glommed onto, and I'm gonna eventually get your guys' thoughts on it, and I want to take it in a very kind of specific direction. Is one thing that I glommed onto was, I think it was the Dallas Willard quote, or was it Tim Keller? But there was something in there toward the end, toward the back half.
Dallas Willard.
Yeah, yeah, in which I'm gonna butcher the quote, and I'm sorry about this, but the quote essentially says like, because of that need that ultimately the Lord fills, and He fills it with the aid and ultimate help of human relationship. That need is not a weakness; it's actually a mark of perfection. So like once
that's Keller. That's
yeah,
in the beginning.
I'm sorry about that, but it was the idea of it's because we're trying to scratch that itch, and because we have this thing. There's a lot of times in which we dread like, how come I don't feel like, at least I went through this season of like wanting to do faithfully, if I could say it that way, and I wanted to make God my everything, and of course I'm in a daily battle to make Him my everything, but there's so many different ways in which like loneliness would creep in, depression would creep in, and all these things, and then I would start to feel guilty about feeling bad, about feeling lonely, about all these things, right? And that quote sort of helps realign the idea like, no, there's a certain bit of, for lack of a better word, need. There's a certain bit of need that almost points to the fact that you are being perfected, if I may say it that way.
Yep.
Yeah, which sounds like what Keller was trying to say with that quote. It's God sees you, and He knows that you have need, and He knows that you have this void that you want to fill, and as He fills it with Himself and with the aid of human connection, you then become perfected, almost getting close to that place in the Bible, especially in the creation story, in which God says, "Let us make man in our image," ultimately pointing to the idea that God in Himself feels community. So so His creation can in themselves feel community, thus bringing them a little bit closer to God. But for me, what I wanted to kind of talk about was today was, for lack of a better term, like the tripwires of that kind of an understanding of community, right? Because sometimes what happens is people come to church and they're trying to do church faithfully, but then somebody wrongs them, and then it colors their view of God, right? And then there's the other side of that, which is somebody has like a bad tainted view of God, or something that isn't biblical, something that isn't rooted in love, something that doesn't flow from the heart of the Father. And so it causes them to not be able to get close to community, if I can say it that way, right? So to the person listening to the message and hearing the message and wanting to live out the message faithfully, how do we avoid the tripwires? Or how do we know that in the balancing act of like loving people, getting plugged in with people, and Christian friendship and discipleship and human relationships, and on the other side of that there is like really intimate communion with God, in the balancing act, how do we know that the scales are tipped a little too far one way or the other, if it's even possible, right? How do we avoid the tripwires? How do we even see that, like the tripwires are there and all that stuff? Like, you guys get kind of what I'm getting at? Yeah. So yeah, like what are your thoughts on that? How do you identify those things?
You alive? You okay? I don't think you can avoid it, unfortunately. The tripwires, that is, right? I think the tripwires come with the territory of community. And tripwires, because we're sinful, it's basically sin that you're kind of, the manifestations of sin that you're kind of tripping over. So let's say human community, you often hear, "Oh man, I don't get plugged into church because I was hurt by the church," right? And I sympathize with that, because I've been hurt in the church too. But then the question is that hurt going to cause you to completely withdraw? because that option at the end of the day is actually not good for you. So I would always say to people, as much as there's tripwires within the human side of community, part of growing in intimacy, part of growing in covenant with that community is to lean into those times, and that's where the ideals of forgiveness and stuff comes in. And I know that's freaking hard as hell. Oop, excuse me.
How dare
beat
you?
Yeah, it's just really hard. But what I found is leaning out always leads to more detriment than leaning in. And I would encourage, in fact, I would say you grow deeper when you kind of trip over that tripwire and you get up and you keep walking. So that's the human side. On the God side, I would say, yeah, we all have distorted understandings of God to a certain degree, and that can affect our interaction with the community. But that's where, you try to find a community where they teach the Bible, and you get your tripwires kind of removed, or you get your image of God rehabilitated. And that's actually powerful, because I've seen when people have their image of God rehabilitated, it leads to profound healing in their human relationships as well. I've seen people liberated of like some tremendous pains and baggages through that thing as well. So, that's kind of the short little pithy gist I would give to that response. I'm sure there's layers upon layers, but did I give you enough time?
I think what you were saying before, I agree with that. If in a relationship with another person, there isn't any kind of obstacle or any kind of tripwire, anything that happens, then, if there's never any kind of test, then it's kind of hard to go deeper, to get to a more connected place with the person. And, I am a firm believer that, God can take anything and make something beautiful out of it. And even, really harsh comments people might make, or misunderstandings that people have, or just really hurtful things like actions. I think that it takes a lot of prayer, a lot of resisting normal human urges, and just wanting and having an increasing desire to see people as God sees them, and understanding that, that idea that everyone is a main character in their own story,
Sure.
like the other people are also a main character in their own story, and they're perceiving the situation a different way. And just trusting in the fact that God is doing something else in that person's heart and mind that does not necessarily, have to be the same as what he's doing in your own, walk and in your own journey. I feel like that helps me. And there's like little things that I tell myself also to try to remember. I'll be like, depending on what the situation is, sometimes I'll be like, okay, this person is somebody's daughter too. This is a precious, this person was a baby who was like really, when you look at a baby and you're like, and then you do everything for the baby. This person is someone's son. This person's someone's grandson, anything like that. Sometimes that's the first step that helps me to start to see it. And with a lot more prayer and a lot more just resisting. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like that. The idea of remembering that this is someone's son, this is someone's daughter. It goes back to that idea of remembering that we're all made in the image of God. And that should kind of color how far or how close we get to like the limit of some of these things, right? But specifically or I should say, speaking to the place of need, though, right? Because isn't it sometimes the case, and this is the hard thing about like doing local church ministry, I find, there are a lot of hard things about pastoral ministry in general, but specifically about, surrounding this topic is the idea of like, okay, fine. I will acknowledge that there is a need and I have some need, but I've filled it already via like, you know, friendship with like this small community of people, or I've filled it already with like my spouse, my husband, my wife, or I've filled it already with, you know, friends from college or people that I've known for a long time. Like, what is this great kind of a push that we're making towards like getting out of our comfort zones and our bubbles? Like, what is the big deal? Like, isn't this enough, right? And it's funny because on the other end of that, like we hear all the time that church is cliquey, and we hear that church like can sometimes feel like a club of just like random groups and pockets of people. But then the other part of it is like, you know, don't make me get outside of my comfort zone. So there's a part of it where it's just like, well, what do you want? Do you want your familiarity, or do you actually want the church to be the church, right? So address that for me, like to the person that may or may not even know that that's where they are, right?
Yep.
Like how do you address that? How do you challenge somebody lovingly, but like seriously challenge somebody to step outside their comfort zones and get them to see that, hey, maybe slowly, right? You know, like one person at a time. It doesn't have to be let everybody into your life, but what does that look like? Stepping outside of that comfort zone and addressing the place of need, and possibly like making new friendships and community out in places that you didn't expect to happen.
So I think near the end of your sermon, you said something about how there's a difference between having friends who are Christian and friends, you know, like outside, and you guys are like, yeah, I'm a Christian too, I'm a Christian, versus friends that you actually have that deep relationship with that is rooted in Christ, where you can actually pray together and confess to one another and keep each other accountable, all those things. Yeah, I think in order to get to the latter place, instead of just having friends with that title, it requires a lot of intentional effort. And sometimes it might just require you to imagine yourself as like a new person in a new space. And if no, you know what's wrong with you or what your flaws are, what's not so cute about you or not so appealing. And, you know, if you were new in a place, then how would other people maybe perceive you? And then if they didn't want to talk to you or didn't want to include you in something, you know, how would that go? So thinking about that sometimes can be kind of a mental push at least, but also just considering that no person's a waste of space. You know, I think that's one of the worst ways to make a human being feel that he or she's a waste, and that he or she doesn't deserve to be somewhere. And I think doing everything in your power and in your space and your ability to not make a person feel that way, especially when it comes to church. I think sometimes the first step is just to listen, you know, even if you want other people to, you know, think of you a certain way or whatever. When you go to a group, you know, you get dressed up, you do whatever. When you're in that group place though, what if you just kind of sit back and you listen to what people have to say, and then you might find yourself being humbled by there being commonalities between you and people. I feel like that's happened a lot for me in like middle school and high school. And so I try to not, you know, have these opinions of people when I first meet them, because I realize a lot of times they prove me wrong. And if I had just been a little more open-minded and accepting, and I had listened better from the beginning, then I would have learned that there is something there, and there's a deeper way that God is connecting us than just, you know, our favorite color or our food taste or our preference in movies or something like that.
Yeah, that's great. Well put. For me, it's a question of discipleship. At the end of the day, the friends you're going to pick, I mean, this is like 99.9% of the people, you're going to pick who make you feel comfortable. You know, you're not thinking, okay, am I making this friend because they're going to stretch me as a disciple, right? So the fact of the matter is the friends you're going to have around you are, believe it or not, they're 99 times out of 100, they're probably going to just leave you in a very comfortable place. You're not going to grow very much. probably not going to challenge you very much. How often are you doing Bible study with your friends? Right? How often are you praying? How often are you pursuing the mission of God and things like that? And the vision of community in the Bible, where Paul says, in the Hebrews, it says, spur one another on toward loving good deeds, right? The word for spur is provoke, is to irritate. And you find that dynamic within your small circle of friends? And I would say probably not, if you're being honest. And that's what the church is for. The church is there to grow you as a disciple. Now, if you don't want to grow as a disciple, by all means, just kind of stay within your comfortable enclave, right? But I don't think that's God's vision for you. And if you really had friends who really cared about you as Christians, they would also tell you, yo, you can't just kind of stay within this little bubble of yours. You need to kind of put yourself out there. And I would say, here, look, I'm an introvert, right? I'm telling you, man, I would just like to have my 3 friends and call it a day, if I'm being completely honest, right? But what I would say is, I know the Bible says that is not the body. You have to be within the greater body of Christ. And the way the Bible describes it, it's not just like just a few people. It's just kind of you're within a family. And what I've experienced in my interactivity, and I'm always uncomfortable. I'm always like being pushed out of my comfort zones because of my job, right? I would say that I've been stretched, I've learned, I've grown, I've been humbled, I've been all these different things. And I would say it's made me, I think, a better version of myself than I was before. So that's what I would say. Like, when we say, hey, community is great, we're not saying, oh, community is going to be a happy party all the time. We're saying it's going to be, like, healthy for you. Like, certainly I can sit here, I just want to eat chocolate cake all day, right? But if I do that, I'm going to die. When we say, healthy community, we're not saying we're just going to have chocolate cake all day. No, we're going to say you're going to have a full, balanced diet. And through that, you're going to grow as a human being. So that's the way I would phrase it. Yeah.
I've encountered multiple people who actually think that you're an extrovert. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure he's an introvert.
Yeah.
They're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, so that's how good of a job you're doing with that.
Dude, I have been trained like a whipped dog, man. You don't understand. Actually, I when I became ordained as a pastor, they put you through a whole battery of psychological tests and assessments and stuff. And I was off the charts introvert. But what they said is I had this other characteristic, I forgot, enterprising thing, or I don't know what it was called, where I can mimic extroversion for the sake of trying to. So I'm a faker. I'm a fake extrovert.
Is that the title of today?
I'm a faker.
I'm a faker.
Oh boy. Yeah, I get that sometimes too. Dawn will tell me about people that she knows or whatever. Or, my wife lovingly will tell other people that I tricked her because, I put in an effort in the beginning. I still put in an effort. It's a different kind of effort. But she was like, you absolutely tricked me. I was like, I'm sorry. This is just what you have to do, to meet new people and to, you got to put yourself out there. And there's a certain level of dying to yourself that that it requires and all that stuff.
So wait, she thought you were an extrovert.
Yeah, she thought I was an extrovert. A lot of people do, but that's the mark of like a pastor that tries, right? Like, if ministry was all about personality types, then no introverts would ever be pastors. But in my circle, at least, I know a lot of people. I know a lot of pastors specifically. A lot of Korean American local church pastors that I know are introverts.
Yeah. That's true. 3 out of 4 here.
Yeah, because the mark of a pastor is not your personality; it's whether or not you answer the call to ministry, right? Yeah. It's there's like a kind of a different level of a rubric.
Yeah. I will say though, I think I told this to you. I you were mute when I first met you. Because, like,
Yeah.
he was just kind of attending our church, and, he didn't really know. And I think he didn't want to step on any toes. I think the season you were also coming out of
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So I'm like, this guy, does he talk?
Yeah. It was a really interesting season
Yeah.
Wow.
when you first met me.
Yeah. But then, like, we did the premarital counseling. I'm like, dude, this guy talks a lot. It's like,
Too much.
yeah.
as
But
my wife would
it's,
say.
it's great. We all
Yeah.
learned who you are a little bit more. So.
Well, that actually brings me to where I wanted to go next in the conversation because, like, invariably when you talk about community and when you talk about doing friendship, relationship, fellowship with other people, we're kind of talking, and rightfully so, I think, for the beginning part of this conversation, but we're sort of talking in like, it's not a hypothetical, but like there's an ideal here, right? When it comes to Christian fellowship and when it comes to, doing community well, like a lot of times we talk in ideals, like we should do this and we should step out in faith and we should try and we should open ourselves up. And, we're just doing the best that we can for people to kind of do what we're talking about, right? But three pastors around this conversation, as well as countless numbers of people who will, watch or listen to this conversation, almost immediately where their mind goes and where my mind goes is the place of like, okay, I did it and then I got hurt, right? I did it and somebody like betrayed my trust. I did it and I just got absolutely torched by this person and then just a laundry list of sins, right?
Yeah.
So do me a favor, stepping outside of the place of like the ideal, the Christian ideal that we're talking about, how then, because essentially the question is like, what about those of us who are hurt? Right? Like, what about those of us, and we're trying to like hear a message about fellowship and hear a message about community, and like, it is right to need people. It is right to like want to have some form of that itch scratched by the loving and intimate, but also challenging and accountable relationships with people, right? But I did it and I got hurt. And I don't want to do it again.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I will say I sympathize with it because, being hurt sucks. And I will say, we get hurt all the time as pastors, right? And I just want to withdraw and be like, I don't want to do this anymore. I get this sentiment. But again, it goes back to what's healthy and what's not. Because the more you withdraw, like C.S. Lewis says, if you don't loving people comes with the potential of being hurt. So if you get hurt, you withdraw more and more, and you just end up with becoming this hardened person where you're incapable of loving at all eventually. But I get it. I get the pain of it. And I think I talked a little bit about this in my sermon where I had been hurt by a congregant, right? But where did I find healing? Within the body of Christ. I asked somebody to pray for me, right? And so what I will say is, as much as, the principle is ideal, right? But the New Testament itself is testimony to the fact that community is messy through and through. Actually, I was praying one day this week. I was like, God, thank you for the New Testament because the churches there are really screwed up. And it shows that this is kind of par for the course, And so, and numerous Christian authors have said, look, Christian community is messy. Expect messiness. And from there, if you work with the Christian principles that Jesus has given us, you'll break through to the other side. And so, it won't be easy. It'll be messy. You'll get hurt along the process. But I really don't know what other choice you have. You know what I mean? You can, again, become more insular, but that goes against everything that the Bible teaches. And I get the instinct again, but that's really not the answer. I don't know how to say this. Over the many years of doing ministry, many people have decided to short circuit their stay in a community. Right? I don't want to be in this community anymore. I'm out. And I would always tell them, look, I think if you hack it out, if you persevere, there's stuff at the other side of that perseverance that you won't ever taste unless you try to persevere. And I think there are joys there that are well worth the effort. 99% of people won't take me up on that offer. But I will say from my own experience, when crap happens to me, rather than parachuting out, I found leaning in, I've broken through to the other side in so many relationships. I've learned healing. I've learned forgiveness. I learned all these things that, as I said kind of in the opening, I've become a better version of myself, I believe, because of that. And that's really all I can kind of say about that.
I think that in a prior episode, I had shared something that is kind of like this direct kind of scenario where I was hurt by someone in the church. And from that experience, and others, I think I did what Pastor Key is saying, and I kind of leaned into it. I stayed, I waited, and, the person was a leader and, was standing up there and like saying certain things and preaching certain things. And I just sat there thinking, how ironic, and I was just sitting in my hurt. But week after week, I continued to sit because I felt that God was telling me that it would be more detrimental to all parties involved if I just left, and I was just bitter and I walked out. It would hurt that person. It would hurt me. It would hurt the community to see that kind of like reaction. And so I found that on the other side of it, I learned so many things, and I really tasted the goodness of God through just staying and waiting to see what God would turn this relationship or this mess into. And I would say that definitely I saw the light of all of this. I saw what he was, allowing me to go through that for, what he was turning that situation into. And I came out of it in a place where I'm genuinely happy for the person, and in like different achievements or milestones that will come up, like just genuinely so happy. I like pray for the person has prayed for me, and we are at such a better place now. And there was a lot of healing, a lot of lessons learned, a lot of, just all the things that I guess God had intended for me to learn through that, even though it was really messy and it was awful and it was really, really hard and painful. But I also don't think that God expects you to right away just turn around and be like, I'm going to be great. I'm going to forgive and everything's going to be perfect. I think, he weeps with you, he is sad for you and with you. And sometimes there needs to be time, I don't think any of us could sit here and say, well, if someone's hurt, then they should just get right back on it and just force themselves. No, we all sympathize with pain, and acknowledge it, and just want to see the best outcome, the beauty that comes out of it.
It's a years-long, arduous journey, community. I will say, though, there are situations where it's abusive, and I think the healthy thing is to extricate yourself from a situation like that. But that being said, I think pulling the trigger should be something that's very thoughtfully done, in any community. I think part of the problem, especially in America, is I know people hate it when we talk like this, but the consumeristic mentality that has taken hold of Christianity in this just area in general. If I'm not happy here, I got other choices. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, that is fundamentally counter to what persevering community is all about, And when I look back at my life, I don't know if it was just I didn't know there were choices out there, but, the churches I grew up in, things weren't rosy. But what I learned during those seasons of my life is you stay, you make it work. This is family. And so, that's just kind of a thing. The last thing I'll say to this is, you've heard of the stages of community, right? There's the honeymoon stage. You come into a new community. Oh my God, it's amazing. Everybody's so friendly, right? And it's rosy. And then there's stage 2, which is called the letdown stage, where somebody hurts you, something, and you bump your head against the authority of the church or something. And then it's at that point, like, oh man, is this place really what it's all cracked up to be? But then the third stage is called the covenant stage, where you realize, look, we're all human beings here. How do we covenant with one another to make a community? How do we give of one another? How do we forgive? How do we, do this and that? And that's where you have healthy community, and that's kind of where we want to end up. But to get there requires navigating the messiness of community. And even when you do get there, it's always going to be messy. I don't know. I've never been part of a community that's not messy. And if I'm bouncing around every time I get hurt, that feels a little counter to what I feel like Jesus has taught me. So anyway, those are just thoughts.
Well, I mean, can I press in there because, and this is just like my own bias, I guess, because of my experience and my past and my stuff, and like we all have stuff, right?
Yeah.
And my stuff causes me, in listening to this conversation and in taking part in this conversation, one of the first places that my mind goes is to the place of trust, right?
Yeah.
You know what? Okay, fine. I forgive you, but I don't trust you, and that is especially in our culture. I mean, I've heard it said a number of times in local churches around this area. I've said it a number of times myself. I've told people to adopt it. Like it's helped me in seasons past, for sure. I've needed it. I've need some kind of way to make sense of all of that. But lately, especially in the last couple years or so, I've had to re-examine that posture.
Okay.
Because okay, so you forgive somebody that hurt you, or it's not even hypothetical for me. Like, okay, somebody hurt me, and I do my best. I really try in prayer and in petition and just in intimacy with the Lord, like in my own relationship with Him. I try to get to a place where, like, okay, God, I don't want to continue to sin, so I'm going to take seriously the command to forgive. To forgive, and just as unconditionally as you've forgiven me, I'm going to try to take that. I'm going to try to do that as well. But what do I do about this other part of my heart or my feeling or whatever? Like, what do I do about trust? Because, like, am I supposed to trust them? Am I supposed to not? What is like the formula here? Because, like, fine, like I forgive them, but I don't know that I'll ever let this person into my life again, or blah blah blah. And for a long time, I just used to walk around with the idea of, like, forgiveness doesn't always mean trust. But then also I got really challenged one day when a pastor just said it this way, like, if you think that is the Christian ideal, if you think that that's what God had in mind when He dreamt up this thing called community, then you're seriously misunderstanding a huge part about God's own nature Himself, right? Like, that's number one. But number two, like, good luck trying to live in this world with this weird sort of, like, okay, I forgive you, but I don't trust you. And every time somebody, like, betrays you, or every time somebody does something that you don't like, you forgive them, but you don't trust them. So you're just wary of all these people, and you don't trust all these people, right? Because, like, you'll find reasons to like remove your trust or to take away your trust from a person, right?
Yeah.
That's where my mind goes,
Yeah,
right?
that's fair.
And so on the way to the ideals that we were talking about in the first half of this conversation, tell me this. What do I do about that? How do I regain, how do I, like, extend trust to a person again, right? Like, what's the posture there? How do I make sense of that? Like, is it wrong for me not to trust somebody? Is it wrong for me I'm not talking about, like, like outside of the church walls. I'm not talking about someone who's not I'm talking about in the walls and the fellowship of the church, because it happens all the time, doesn't it? So like how help me
Yeah.
help me understand that. Like, what do I do with trust or my lack thereof?
I haven't figured it out. I'm being honest. I've gotten hurt so much that I find trust hard at times. But I got challenged too. So this is kind of where I would start, right? At a certain point, I had gotten hurt so many different times. I'm just like, I'm afraid to love people as I've loved them in the past. Because when I meet somebody and I try to love them, I give them everything, like in terms of my heart and my trust, right? And so I find myself almost wanting to pull back with everybody. Like, I'm going to meet this new person, but I'm not going to give them everything because I don't know. And then I listened to this podcast by a pastor down south, I think in Florida, and he was just like, you can't do that. You have to risk getting hurt. You always got to put yourself out there. And so in the general scheme, I've decided my policy is no matter who it is, if I meet somebody new, they're getting everything from me. So that's kind of one decision I made. Now, when it comes to other people who have actually hurt me, right, which is I think the case that you're talking about, I don't have a good answer, because every day I struggle to forgive, and I think I've gotten to a place, but then trust is just extremely difficult for me at that point if I don't see a reciprocal effort to try to reconcile. Like the way I'm trying to reconcile, if I don't see that. But if there is that reciprocal effort, I find trust is much easier to build. But if they're continuing kind of in their pattern of behavior, it's hard for me to trust. So, I mean, this is an extreme example, right? Let's say there's somebody who molests children, right? And, they say they've reformed. It's going to be hard to trust them, right? And so they're going to have to earn my trust. And, they work hard and then they built up that trust. But I don't know. It's not an automatic thing that I've been able to give, unfortunately. And I don't really have a good answer, if I'm being completely honest. Yeah. I'm a bad pastor.
Is that the title?
No, I'm kidding. You have any thoughts, Pastor Kathy?
I think we had this conversation sort of in the office.
Sure.
Yeah, a few weeks ago. And I think that one thing that was said was that when you lose trust in someone, you don't have to just, act like it never happened and just blindly just trust them with everything again. But if you have this kind of very hardened heart and perspective towards ever trusting them again, one, like that's not healthy to have towards someone, depending on what it was about, I think we said.
Sure.
Because of abuse and other things like that. But I think that when you lose trust in somebody, then you need to work it out, not only with that person, but you need to reconcile with God also. You need to reconcile whatever it is, because usually things go two ways when it's, between person A and person B. And whatever it is on your end, even if you weren't like the perpetrator, whatever it is that you weren't able to understand or be open to, if that particular situation is relevant to that, then that part you need to take up with God. And for the other person, I think just having this idea, like, I'm never going to trust this person again, though. Yeah, like that part, I think you also need to reconcile with God. If God really wanted us to just sit in our rooms and eat chocolate cake and not talk to anyone, he would have made this world with like, little boxes for each person, or he would have made a little world for each person. But he put us on this earth around specific people in a specific geographic location and everything, and in a specific family for a reason. He wants us to, be open to some degree. But I think trust is definitely earned. You don't need to go into it blindly. But I think the idea of expectations, like expectations that you put on someone, you know, I think that is not equivalent to trust. You know, like if,
Okay.
yeah, like if somebody is constantly, you know, doing something and you've told that person that you don't, you know, feel comfortable with that, or you just don't like it, you don't prefer it, and the person continues to do it, you know, and you realize, oh, I can't, you know, if you get really dramatic, I can't trust this person to, you know, consider my whatever. I think at that point, you know, you can take it up with God. Very hard to do. A lot of, again, resisting of your own wants. But then the expectation, though, the level of it, and just, yeah, how you're going to go about being around that person from then on, I think that is something that is not necessarily always like the exact same. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that. I thought of something, and I know we're running out of time, but I just want to throw this out here. I think the reason for why you need to examine the reason for why you don't want to trust that person. I would say a lot of the times it's just pride. And if that's the case, then that's something you need to give up. So I think that's something, right? But if they're legitimately showing themselves to be untrustworthy, I think that's a different scenario where you need to think hard and pray hard about how you interact with that person. So you still humanize them, so you still love them the best that you can. But you don't put yourself in a situation where necessarily they're going to violate your trust in some way, right? That's, I would say, the closest, because I was just thinking about my heart, like, why won't I trust certain people? And I realized, oh my God, a lot of it is I just don't want to. It's pride. And like, damn it, God.
Gotta bleep out a lot of words.
Gosh, Pastor Key.
Yeah, my filter is low today.
Yeah. Yeah, for the sake of time, probably best to just make the turn. But, you know, for me, if I try, you know, and, you know, one of the things that's helped me at the end of the day with this thing called trust and my lack thereof of people, of individuals or groups of people or whatever, you know, like finding any reason not to trust somebody just because I'm petty or I'm prideful or whatever. Like I have to reckon with that, right?
Yeah.
But I think the one thing that helps me is that like it's all of this becomes hard when something like trust is how do I say, like it's compartmentalized away from forgiveness, away from community, away from fellowship, away from like intimacy, away from prayer, away from worship. Like I think sometimes what happens is we talk about these things in these individual streams, right? And we make these cases for like trust or my lack thereof, and it's this individual stream of conversation.
That's right.
And then we put it over here, and then we put forgiveness in this individual stream of conversation, or grace, individual, mercy, individual, and we have all these different individual streams of conversation around these types of things. So when I talk about my trust or my lack thereof, I sound pretty okay. I sound pretty blameless when I say, but this person hurt me, so I've forgiven them and I will not trust them. You know, like I get to sound blameless, right? But that doesn't really make sense in light of the conversation surrounding grace,
Yeah. There you
mercy, like
Prayer.
my lack of trust of somebody or people or groups of people or whatever, or leaders or whatever my trauma is, right? Like my lack of trust for this person doesn't make sense when I bring grace into the conversation, when I bring mercy into the when I bring the gospel into the conversation. And perhaps something, if you're listening, if you're watching, or maybe just even the three of us around this table, right? Like it's the thing of remembering to put trust or fellowship or community or accountability or prayer or worship. Remember that it's It's not individual. It's woven together, and it's in this great tapestry called the Christian life. And you know, the last thing I'll say is like none of this makes sense outside of the gospel.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so just look at Jesus, right? Like, look at the life of Jesus. Pastor Key, I love how you said, thank God for the New Testament. I think so too. Thank God for the New Testament, because when I read it, Jesus breaks my brain about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I just get to the place of like, this is after the crucifixion. This is during, you know, his revelation to people, like his physical body, showing himself physically to people. And I imagine like all the trust that it required of Christ to do that, to show himself to the very people that denied him, to show himself to the very people that thought that he was dead, right? Like nothing makes sense outside of the gospel. So if you're struggling with it, if you're struggling with forgiveness or any of these things, just remember the gospel and remember that if it was extended to you, you can extend it to other people.
Yeah.
None of this is going to be easy. Nobody said that it is. Take it from 3 pastors who have their own stories and trauma. But we try.
Yeah.
You should try. And as you try, we'll come alongside you and pray for you and love you in all the ways that you need it.
I think that's a good final word. I like how you tied it up, because it explains a recent thing that I went through. I was with a group of people, and I was like, I don't trust these people. But then I was like, what does the gospel want me to do here? And then I said, it wants me to engage them. And then so I did. I was like, wow. So you're exactly right. I think that's the final word.
And that's the bottom line. Thank you guys for joining me today. I know that it was a bit of a rocky start, but we eventually found our way. And, you know, honestly, like the encouragement alone from the conversation kind of gives me new life. So I hope that it does the same for the both of you. I hope that it does the same for you as well, listener, audience member. And in everything, just remember the gospel, and some of this stuff will just work itself out. And when it doesn't, if it doesn't, that's why you have pastors who want to pray for you, who want to love you, and who want to walk with you. With that, we're going to bring this time to a close. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back next week with another new episode, and this is NMPC Plus, signing off for now.